From Beyond Marketing, it's the 20-Minute Call, a podcast about the dreamers, boundary pushers, rebels, and champions of the skydiving industry. Each episode is a narrative journey highlighted by the highs, lows, and luck that the skydiving industry delivers, as told by the most influential people within the sport. If you've ever dreamed of becoming a skydiver, perhaps opening a drop zone, or becoming the next world champion, check out the 20-Minute Call hosted by me, James LeBarry. Helmut Cloth is a pioneering German engineer and entrepreneur renowned for revolutionizing skydiving safety through his invention of the Cybernetic Parachute Release System, or what we know as the CYPRES. His journey into skydiving began in 1972, and by 1986, he was actively participating in European Relative Work Attempts, or RW. During one such event, a close friend tragically lost his life due to a malfunction, impacting the ground with neither his main nor reserve parachute deployed. This profound loss motivated Helmut to envision and develop a reliable automatic activation device to prevent similar accidents. After 4.5 years of rigorous research and development, and through 12 prototypes, Helmut introduced the first CYPRES in 1991. This groundbreaking device set new standards in parachuting safety, ensuring automatic activation of the reserve parachute under specific conditions, thereby significantly reducing fatalities in the sport. In 1990, Helmut founded Airtec Systems in Germany to manufacture and further develop the CYPRES. His relentless dedication to enhancing skydiving safety earned him the prestigious FAI Gold Medal in 1997, recognizing his outstanding contributions to the sport. Helmut's commitment to innovation and safety has left an indelible mark on the skydiving community, with the CYPRES being credited for saving thousands of lives worldwide. His work continues to influence safety protocols and equipment standards in parachuting and other aerial disciplines. It is my true pleasure to welcome Helmut Cloth to the 20-Minute Call podcast. Welcome, Helmut.
Thank you for having me for the interview.
Thank you for being here. It is an absolute honor, and I'm grateful for your time. Let us begin, shall we? Helmut, what I'd like to do, we all know of your accomplishments in parachuting, but we know very little about your background before you invented the CYPRES. Can you share, where did you actually grow up? Where were you raised? And what was your childhood like?
I grew up where I still live, which is in the middle of Germany. I went to ground school, I went to high school. Then I did learn a job, which in Germany means you have to make a commitment for 3 years. That's the time in Germany necessary to learn something, like a job. So I had to do this. And I did. While I was in my program there, I did get the chance to study at our local university. There were possibilities. So I had to go to my boss and try to shorten my contract by a year. Fortunately, that was possible. So after that, I went to university and started to study there. While doing that, I started a company, and I did both permanently. I did meet all my commitments in the university, all the lessons and so on. And on the other hand, worked for this and with this company. That was fairly successful. At one stage, it did become difficult to still do both. That was when the company had approximately 18 people working. And then I decided to stay on the company's side. Before, I had done my first degree at the university, which went very well. And I was very close before the end of for the second, but then I stopped that. This company went on for a while, and then I sold it.
If you're a DZO or DZM listening to this podcast, and you're not using Burble, I've got a question. Why not? If the reason is price, what's the cost of your time? Other booking and manifest softwares are a one-size-fits-all. Burble was built from the ground up by a DZO for DZOs to maximize efficiency. Now, isn't that nice? There's no software that compares. Choose Burble. Helmut, what was it that you studied? What did you do in this company?
The company had sand blasting work, something which is very useful because with this method, it's possible to restore lots of things that otherwise would have to be thrown away. It made very much sense to save on resources and also energy. So I did that. The other question was?
I'm curious, were you an engineer by trade?
No, I was not. When I went to study, I studied economies, which is something that I was very interested in since ever.
Can you explain how someone who studies economies is able to invent such a special device like the CYPRES? How were you qualified to create this computer?
You mentioned that. The reason for me to think about this was the fatality of my friend Freddy Leising. By the way, that happened when we had a weekend to sort out people for planned record, German or possibly European RW record. And I went there with Freddy in one car, and on the way I had to go alone, so that was very emotional. After the funeral of Freddy, I started to think about it, as you had said already. At that time, there were AADs available. There were even more manufacturers of AADs than nowadays, but all these devices were dangerous. They fairly often did misfire, which, as everybody knows, can injure the person wearing it, can also injure other persons in the air, and also can cause jump aircraft to go in, which has happened several times. At that time, actually, nobody used an AED. I've never used one. We had invited 100 people for this event on this weekend, and from this 100, there was one person showing up having an AED. And he was told by the others that he would not be in the load with this device. So he said, I will not switch it on. And the other said, regardless, you are not in here. So what happened was that he removed this AED from his rig in order to be able to join the group. That was what I knew. And when I thought about maybe getting involved in the AAD subject, it was clear to me that there would only be the chance to convince people to use an AAD when this device would be ideal. Not something a little bit better or a little bit different, but a big difference, an ideal device. And because of that, I took a piece of paper and wrote down what, in my opinion, was a good or perfect AED. That in first place was never show incorrect activation. That was the reason why nobody had an AED. Second was be absolute reliable when necessary. The next point was be extremely accurate. That was thought because of an AED that fires in 3,000 feet doesn't make much sense. It must be low, the lowest altitude possible, and if that is the requirement, then the device has to be able to determine the altitude precisely. And everybody will participate that. We are talking about freefall situation. To determine the altitude in freefall, at least as long as it's measured by air pressure, is a big problem. So this point, extremely accurate, was one of the big difficulties. And I can say that we needed 2 years on this subject before the idea was that it was good enough. Then the next point was no restriction to the parachutist. All the existing AADs required a lot of restrictions. You were forced to do this and that, and you were forbidden to do that and that and that, and so on. And of course, if we are talking about a perfect device, then you don't want that. You just want it to do its job, but you don't want to care, and you don't want to be in any way restricted. The next point was to equip such a device with an own independent opening system of the reserve container. All AADs before that were existing pulled on the ripcord, the reserve ripcord, in order to open the reserve container. That means the skydiver did that with his handle, and the AAD that did the same. But everybody has heard bent pin. That means that the closing pin on top of the reserve, being in the reserve closing loop, is bent, is not straight. And if that is the case, and both the skydiver and the AAD have to use this, then the skydiver is still in the air but already dead, which is something that wouldn't fit to a perfect AAD. We had the idea, later, because of my point, to look for a second independent way that could be handled by a machine to open the reserve container. The next point was only minimal attention, not much, because people don't do that, because people forget about it and so on. The next point is this handling that is necessary should be simple, not at all complicated, because things go wrong. The next point was that the whole system should not be detectable from outside. You must think back, people denied AADs. Typically, if somebody talked about an AAD, people said, an AAD? For me? Are you crazy? I don't want to kill myself. So on this basis, the idea was to make it invisible so that people that had the trust and wanted to try, that they can do that without that others made a big point of it and denied it. The next point was maintenance, only very little or no maintenance. Of course, no is the best, no question, and is the cheapest, no question. But if any maintenance is required, then as little as possible. Next point was to make it small, that because the containers are getting smaller and smaller, and that was already at that time so. And making it light, because why should you carry additional weight if there's a possibility to eliminate that? And of course, it had to withstand all outside influences while parachuting, packing and transiting and so on. And of course, it had to be made in a way that it could be installed not in one type of container, but best in all containers. And there is so many different containers and constructions and so on and so on and so on. So these were 13 requirements which I did put together. And then the question was, could it be possible to design something that can do all this? I was not a technical person, I was just a skydiver, but because of the two companies before, and I had sold the second one shortly before this accident of Freddy, I had the general possibilities to care. I could take the time, and I also had no problem concerning the money. So what I did was, I gathered a group of people from our university and a group of people from a big computer company which was close, and started with those to discuss this subject, which of course was difficult because these people didn't understand. An episode, there were some professors on the table with me, and I explained everything, and they looked at me and they said yes, yes, yes. And then one of these professors said, okay, we have heard all this. Where is the literature about this subject? And I said, literature? There is no literature. And then they looked at me a little strange and said, oh, then we cannot do that. And I said, yes, you're right, but the idea is to do it.
Helmut, of the 13 requirements that the CYPRES had to meet, which of the 13 was the most difficult requirement to achieve?
That's a tough question, because what is the difficultest? I've already mentioned that to define the altitude while falling with like 180 kilometers per hour is a very difficult subject. And concerning the time consume of it, that was the longest that we had to overcome. There were others, like the second independent opening means for a machine concerning the reserve container. That was also difficult, but possible, and it took far less than 2 years. We had the idea to, instead of pulling the pin of the loop's reserve container, we could instead just sever this loop, which theoretically can come to the same result. So what we did there was we built a little guillotine, little metal box with 2 springs and a blade and a passing hole for the loop, and tried if it was possible to sever a cord with this. And that worked. So we tried to sever a reserve closing loop with it, and that worked as well. So we did pack a reserve, installed this cutting device inside the reserve container, which was the idea, and tried if the whole function was possible. And that was so, which was satisfying. And then we packed another reserve container construction from a different manufacturer, and did the same, and found that yes, it severed it. And then we did that with the next container, and with the next. Actually, we tried to do this with all containers available, all at that time available. And we saw, yes, it works, and suddenly it didn't. And that was a moment where I thought, okay, this project is ended. That's it. But as things are, we had at that time worked already since a long time with several people full time. Then the question was, can we maybe find why all these containers do allow such a system, and this container does not? ? And we tried to understand containers and how they are and how this opening mechanism functions. And that interrupted actually our work on the AED. And that was a time frame of approximately half a year.
If you're a fan of the 20-Minute Call, I'd like to invite you to be a member of a budding community with me on Patreon. By becoming a patron of the show, you can join me behind the scenes to discuss options for future guests and gain access to some show swag. It's pretty sweet. Details on how to become a patron can be found in the show notes. Okay, back to the show. So in my understanding, in the development of the CYPRES, you literally had to purchase every container system to see how they all work, to see if your device would work inside the container. Is that right?
Principally, yeah. But we haven't purchased very many. We have borrowed them out, as it is in skydiving.
Helmut, could you have imagined that CYPRES would become such a successful company? Because at the time, the research and development to produce such a device, today many economists would say this doesn't make sense to put so much resources, money, time, experts to build something that maybe very few people will buy because so many people didn't believe that AADs truly worked. So did you, even if you solved the problem, Did you believe that this could even be a viable business?
No, I didn't expect that. But that was not the reason. I just wanted to try it out. I wanted to see, is it possible or not possible? And I didn't care about this financial aspect in it, which fortunately I could do because of the time before.
To date, there have been several thousands of lives that have been saved because of your invention. What is the save number?
5,200.
Roughly 5,200 people have been saved by your device. I know that you are very busy. You are working continuously, but do you ever stop and reflect and think about how many people have been saved by what you do, or are you just focused on the work? Do you take the time?
Yeah, unfortunately, the second what you mentioned is the case. I realized that there is another challenge in this whole idea, which I didn't see before. At the time when we tried and were looking for the decision, is it possible or not possible to make something like that? I was of the opinion that if it would be possible, that we then would have won. Later I learned that that was totally wrong, because whatever you are able to make, if you do it and then it fails, that doesn't fit to a life-saving machine. So the idea was to manufacture these devices in a way that, if possible, none, if possible, never will fail. And that is a challenge which is much bigger than just to find out, is it possible or not possible. I mean, as you mentioned, we have worked more than 4 years before we had the idea it is possible, and we didn't know throughout this whole time frame what the outcome would be like. Also, I said that there were several occasions where I thought, that's it. What I learned later was that to generate a production of an high-tech device, unfortunately this has to be high-tech, otherwise it's not possible to fulfill these 13 or 12 and a half requirements. That is a real challenge, because a production that makes no mistakes, even the other way around, compensates mistakes that other people make that are maybe in the supply chain, is very, very difficult. And if you want to have that functioning not for 3 months, but for 3 years or maybe for 30 years, like we are doing it, then that's really, to be honest, it's impossible. But we have somehow managed.
Helmut, what I'm hearing you say is maintaining the standard of perfection, which few other companies in the world ever have to maintain. It seems that though you've been doing this for so long, the pressure to maintain that standard still is very high. Is that accurate to say that?
But my intention was and still is to try to achieve that. As it was already mentioned now, by today we are doing it for 34 years and 29 days. And until now, to my knowledge, we have not seen a CYPRES that did not even one time, fulfill its intended task. That means did not do its job. That has, so far as I know, not happened. Yes, of course, that is the reason and the requirement to keep this up. And to be honest, it's getting more difficult than it was. People nowadays require to have a cell phone on their desk where they work. So the concentration is with their work, but also with the cell phone. And if the cell phone rings or gives a signal, then they immediately have to react and they work with this. So things are getting more difficult, unfortunately, but we do our best.
I imagine what you're describing, particularly with distractions like our mobile phones, is not immune to any company in the world. Everyone is having to deal with that, but in producing a product that requires perfection must be stressful, I would imagine.
That is true. Yeah, that is really true. It's a life-saving machine, and again, my intent is to keep this up. And insofar, you are absolutely correct, yeah.
Helmut, there are many special projects that I think for many people listening, they think that the CYPRES is only found in a rig for fun jumpers, but the CYPRES is used in many other projects. I remember when Felix Baumgartner jumped from space. I remember seeing the CYPRES logo involved with that project. Is there a story that you can share from that project? Because how does a device read barometric pressure from such a high altitude to be able to get correct readings? I mean, I imagine that you are often given new challenges to have to solve that go well beyond skydiving. Is that accurate?
That's accurate. We have approximately 30 different devices at present. And Felix, yes, he had a CYPRES which we made for him and for these requirements. And the requirements were not only the low pressure that you mentioned, the conditions were also that it was very cold. And in space, there's also cosmic radiation, which, if things go wrong, can disturb an electronic. And we do have to have in the CYPRES electronic because, aside of all the measurement difficulties, it's necessary to have a lot of algorithms going and working in order to achieve what is necessary. So we have an electronic, and if this radiation would unfortunately destroy that or disable it, then the whole thing would of course be damaged. If we would have needed it, it could have ended then in a disaster. So we had to take care for all these things, not only the pressure. Concerning the data, when he jumped, he had that CYPRES with him, which was installed functioning, but he also had a CYPRES data logger with him, which allowed us to monitor the actual altitude where he was, which was a little bit different from what some people had as an impression.
I imagine as a business owner, there must be great pressure, stress, knowing that the world is watching this one skydive, this one jump from space. And if the AAD needs to be activated, it's your AAD that everyone knows he is using. Do you sometimes think, why are we getting involved with a project that is a one-off that has so much complication, and it could negatively impact the reputation of the company, all for one skydive? It's a lot of risk, no?
Yes. That's what we have been aware of, yeah. But we did that, and there were other occasions with special stuff which was similar.
Can you share any of the other projects that you all work on that many in the skydiving industry have no idea that CYPRES does beyond for fun jumpers? Can you share anything?
We also have a CYPRES which is made for aircrew people, for pilots and people being in the aircraft and have emergency shoots. The Virgin Galactic company, when they tested their space aircraft, they wanted to go with an aircraft very high. Some years back, this aircraft exploded, and there were 2 people in the aircraft, 2 pilots. One died on the explosion, and the other one was thrown out of the aircraft cell. So he fell down. His comment after it was, suddenly I thought I was going to die, suddenly the parachute opened and I didn't die. And this explosion happened at 16 kilometers above the surface in California. We sometimes have to do with those extremes. Yeah.
I remember that accident. And I didn't know that was a CYPRES that had saved that pilot's life. Are you surprised by some of the requests that you receive for applications for a CYPRES that you had not ever dreamed would be used?
Yeah, there are sometimes questions which surprises us, and there are some applications that we deny to do.
I'm sure there are many no's that must that you must say, no, we don't want to be involved with that. Tell me, Helmut, what is the greatest stress of running a company like yours, where the standard is perfection? What you don't seem to be relaxing 34 years later. You seem to still be very focused. What is the largest stress in your job?
It is what I have already mentioned, the idea to stay with a production that is capable of making devices that will never fail. That is the point. That is a difficulty that is unbelievable.
One thing I've observed is the price of a CYPRES is much the same today as it has been for a very long time. It hasn't gone up in the same ratio as everything else. Why are you so insistent in keeping your costs down when the price of everything is always increasing year over year?
One point is that we gain a lot of experience how to do things, how to improve things, and so on. Also, the quantities that we manufacture were increased over the time. In addition, I'm of the opinion that many skydivers at least, don't have very much money. So it's an idea, if possible, to not overcharge or people. I can mention that we have, at the beginning, we have manufactured our original CYPRES, which, concerning its reliability, did its job perfectly. But we had a fairly big battery in there, which was very special because of the idea of always working, for the device being capable always to work. That means also when it's very, very cold, which batteries are affected by, as most people know, also by too warm conditions, like a rig which is in Eloy and the sun is shining and the rig is black and it's laying on the ground. It's getting very warm in there. And we wanted to guarantee that in every thinkable case it will be capable of doing its job. That means also of doing an activation if necessary and firing the cutter. So we needed, because of these conditions, we needed a battery which was unfortunately very expensive. And to be capable to assure that it always will work, we had to say, and we did so, please change this battery after 2 years. The battery did cost 90 D-marks, which are approximately 50 euros. And that every 2 years, or $50, that every 2 years is a lot of money. So we thought about not increasing the cost, but reducing the cost. We started to work on this. Real idea was not to reduce the battery costs, but to eliminate the battery costs. In 2003, we introduced the CYPRES 2, which had a number of improvements. One of these was that the battery costs on a CYPRES 2 are indeed zero. That means the CYPRES comes, it's usable, the power supply is inside, and the power supply is sufficient to do the job. Full stop.
A remarkable achievement.
And we did, and we also, what we also have seen is that people jumped in water, intentionally or unintentionally, but they jumped in water, especially when it's salt water and even warm salt water. This creates a lot of damage to such a device. We were able to repair some, but we also were unable to repair some, and that means 1,000 euros approximately, or $1,000 are just gone. So the question for our next version CYPRES concerning this property was also if we could find a solution. And the CYPRES 2, that is very good, is waterproof, at least for a water jump. It's waterproof down to 5 meters below the surface for 15 minutes. So this did lead to the situation that there is no more losses of CYPRESes because people jumped intentionally or unintentionally into water since 2003.
This podcast is sponsored by Beyond Marketing, the digital marketing agency for the skydiving industry. Now, I'm not a fan of lots of ads during a podcast. I mean, who likes ads? So I'll stop talking about how marvelously wonderful Beyond Marketing is. But if you're curious about what the amazing people of Beyond Marketing do to help drop zones and manufacturers thrive, then you should check out their website at dropzone.marketing. That's dropzone.marketing. When I first started skydiving, Helmut, you never said, "Is your AAD on?" Everyone always said, "Is your CYPRES on?" It was like AAD and CYPRES, that was the only option. It was just CYPRES. Now there are more competitors. And if you are a sports skydiver, you don't know the details that goes into the CYPRES. What should they know? What would you want people listening to this podcast to know about your product? What makes it different? What should they know? Because it sounds impossible, all the variables, to make it such a great product. But what would you want jumpers to know about it?
Since we started, which was 1986, there are approximately 25 different other AADs. Most people will only know much less than that, but there were that many. Most of those did come and go, but there are some left. That's, I think, what you are referring to. I see it very simple. An AAD is a life-saving device. And the most important part is, will it save my life or not? And I don't want to speak about other products, but I can say all CYPRES together have accompanied by now approximately 184 million jumps, and none has failed.
I don't think anything else needs to be said about that. The record speaks for itself. Helmut, I'm curious, personally, what does a normal day look like for you? What time do you wake up and get about your day, and what does that day look like?
Okay. The company is not in the same town where I live, so I have to go 20 minutes by car to get there. Nowadays, I'm typically there maybe by 9:30 or so in the morning. But because of the requirements, I leave maybe like 6 o'clock in the evening.
So you're still working long days. Do you take time off at all? Or are you a workaholic?
I take some time off, but not that much as people are used to.
Helmut, you've been doing this a long time, but you are still very driven. Are you tired? Or are you still as motivated as you always were? Or both?
And take that still serious, and the target is very simple: no failure.
Which means you work a lot to maintain that.
Aside of that, we had that it's different projects and different applications and so on. But the real challenge is the quality and the quality.
Helmut, what I have known about you in our conversations through the years, and what my listeners cannot see you across the table from me, but what is very clear to me is you really care. I know that many businesses that have been around for as long as yours has, maybe the CEO or the owner is now relaxing a bit on their success. But what is very clear to me is 34 years later, you are still very passionate about maintaining this standard. And that makes me feel good to know that the owner, the inventor, still passionately cares about every single device that's coming through the factory. That would make me feel very good as a skydiver to know that.
Yeah, sorry, that is so.
Well, I think I can speak on behalf of many families whose loved ones are still here, that while I know you work many, many hours and probably don't get to interface or speak with people who have been positively affected, I can surely say we are grateful for your commitment to the sport and for keeping so many of us safe and alive. Thank you for your commitment.
Yes, thank you for saying that.
Helmut, it's been an honor and a pleasure. I'm very grateful for your time. I look forward to to hopefully one day hearing that you'll be in Hawaii on vacation, relaxing.
Thank you, James.
It was a pleasure. Thank you. Hey everyone, thanks so much for listening to the 20-Minute Call podcast. Please do follow us on your podcast app so you always have the latest episode, which is released every Monday. If you want to contact the team, our email address is podcast@beyondmarketing.xyz. This episode was edited and engineered by Garnet Znydrick of the YouTube channel Blue Skies Fun Days. Thanks for listening, and join us next week for our next episode.